is not merely a memory. It is not a love story in the way people usually imagine. It is the story of how a human heart changes when it finally finds someone who makes it feel seen. And if you have ever loved someone deeply, if you have ever missed someone while they were standing right beside you, if you have ever looked at a person and quietly thought, "My life would not be the same without you," then I believe these words were meant for you. So stay. Stay until the last sentence. Stay until the last memory. Stay until the last truth is spoken. Because somewhere between the beginning and the end of this story, you may discover that it has been your story all along. Meeting you is the best thing that ever happened to me. People say those words all the time. Meeting you is the best thing that ever happened to me. You see them in movies. You hear them in wedding speeches. You find them written beneath old photographs, tucked between anniversary messages and heart-shaped emojis. And if we're being honest, after hearing them so many times, they can start to sound ordinary, predictable, almost cliché. Just another beautiful sentence people say when they're in love. But tonight, I want to ask you something. What if those words are not romantic exaggeration? What if they are simply the truth? What if somewhere in this world, there is a person looking at someone they love and realizing that no achievement, no success, no amount of money, no dream they ever accomplished has changed their life as deeply as one unexpected encounter? Because sometimes the greatest thing that happens to you is not something you achieve. It is someone you meet. And maybe that sounds strange. After all, we're taught to measure life by milestones. The degree, the promotion, the house, the business, the destination, the victory, the goals we chase for years. We spend so much of our lives believing happiness lies somewhere ahead of us. Just a little farther. Just one more accomplishment away. Just one more mountain to climb. And then one day, someone walks into your life, not with fireworks, not with dramatic music, not with some magical sign from the universe. Just a person, a completely ordinary human being. And somehow, nothing feels ordinary anymore. Have you ever experienced that? I'm talking to you. Yes, you. Have you ever met someone who quietly changed the atmosphere of your entire existence without even realizing it? Someone who didn't rescue you, didn't solve your problems, didn't arrive carrying answers. Yet somehow their presence alone made life feel different? If you have, then stay with me, because this story may be yours too. Most people think loneliness means being alone, but that isn't always true. Some of the loneliest people in the world are surrounded by others. They laugh at parties. They answer messages. They go to work. They make plans. They show up. From the outside, everything looks normal, successful, even. But inside, there is a silence no one notices. A quiet emptiness hidden beneath routines. A feeling that something is missing, even when you cannot explain what it is. And the strangest part? You become used to it. You stop questioning it. You convince yourself that this is simply adulthood. This is simply life. You wake up. You survive another day. You repeat the process tomorrow. And eventually, you forget what it feels like to expect something beautiful. You forget what it feels like to be genuinely excited by another human being. You forget what it feels like to wonder whether someone is thinking about you while you're gone. Maybe that's why love arrives so quietly. Because if it arrived loudly, we would see it coming. Instead, it slips into our lives disguised as something ordinary. A conversation, a smile, a random message. A moment that seems insignificant at the time. And that is what makes it so powerful. The moments that change our lives rarely announce themselves. They don't say, "Pay attention, everything is about to change." No, they simply happen. And only later do we realize we were standing at the edge of a completely different future. I know, because there was a time when I thought my life was complete. Not perfect, just complete enough. I had responsibilities, goals, plans, a direction. The world kept moving, and so did I. Day after day, month after month, year after year. I wasn't searching for anyone. I wasn't waiting for a miracle. I wasn't standing beneath the stars asking the universe to send me love. I had accepted life exactly as it was. And maybe that's why I never saw you coming. Funny, isn't it? The people who transform our lives are usually the people we never planned for. The people we never expected. The people who arrive while we're busy looking somewhere else. And before we go any further, let me ask you another question. Have you ever looked back at an old version of yourself and realized they had no idea what was coming? No idea who they would become. No idea who they would love. No idea who would eventually matter more than they ever imagined. Think about that for a moment. The version of you from 5 years ago, 10 years ago, could they have predicted the people who would leave fingerprints on their soul? Could they have known whose voice would become comfort? Whose laughter would become home? Whose presence would become peace? Probably not. Life doesn't give us spoilers. And maybe that's a gift. Because if we knew every heartbreak waiting ahead, we'd be terrified. If we knew every goodbye, we'd hesitate. But if we knew every beautiful person we were destined to meet, maybe we'd spend less time worrying. Maybe we'd trust the journey a little more. You know, there is something extraordinary about finding someone who changes nothing around you, yet changes everything within you. The world remains the same. The streets are the same. The sky is the same. The job is the same. The responsibilities are the same. But suddenly your days feel lighter. Your thoughts feel warmer. Your future feels larger. Not because circumstances changed, because perspective changed. And perspective changes when the heart begins to wake up. Maybe that's why people struggle to explain love. Because love is rarely about events. It's about transformation. Invisible transformation. The kind that happens slowly, quietly, like sunrise. No single second feels dramatic. Yet somehow, darkness becomes light. And you don't even notice it happening until you look around and realize everything feels different. Can I tell you something? I think many people spend their entire lives searching for extraordinary experiences, extraordinary success, extraordinary adventures, extraordinary moments. But often the most extraordinary thing that happens to us is meeting someone who makes ordinary life feel meaningful. Someone who turns simple moments into memories. Someone who makes an ordinary Tuesday feel important. Someone who gives significance to things that once felt empty. A text message, a shared silence, a simple question, "How was your day?" Funny how 4 words can mean so much when they come from the right person. Maybe you've felt that before. Maybe you're feeling it right now. Or maybe you're still waiting. If you are, don't leave just yet. Because the story isn't really about finding someone. It's about what happens inside you when you finally do. And perhaps the most beautiful part is this. At the beginning, you don't know. You don't know they're important. You don't know they'll matter. You don't know they'll become part of your story. They're just another person, another face, another conversation, another ordinary moment. Until one day, you look back, and suddenly you realize that moment was never ordinary at all. It was the beginning of everything. And if there's one thing I hope you remember tonight, let it be this. The most life-changing moments often arrive disguised as ordinary days. So don't underestimate a conversation. Don't underestimate a connection. Don't underestimate a person who makes your heart feel understood. Because somewhere between one hello and 1,000 memories, a stranger can become the best thing that ever happened to you. And maybe, just maybe, that is where this story truly begins. The strange thing about life is that the moments that change us forever rarely look important when they're happening. There are no warning signs, no voice from the sky, no message from the universe saying, "Pay attention. This moment will stay with you for the rest of your life." Life doesn't work that way. Instead, destiny often arrives dressed as something ordinary. A conversation, a glance, a simple hello, a moment so small that if you blink, you might miss it. And that is exactly why I almost missed you. If someone had asked me that morning whether my life was about to change, I would have laughed. Nothing felt different. The sky looked the same. The streets looked the same. The world followed its usual rhythm. People rushed to work. Cars moved through traffic. Coffee cooled inside forgotten cups. Everything seemed painfully normal. And maybe that's what makes certain memories so beautiful. The fact that they begin in complete silence. No drama. No spectacle. No reason to believe they will matter. Yet years later, you can still remember them with impossible clarity. You can remember where you were, what you felt, what the air smelled like, how your heart behaved before it knew what was coming. Have you ever noticed that? How some memories fade while others refuse to leave. Entire years disappear into fog. But one moment remains. One smile. One sentence. One encounter. Frozen in time. As if your soul knew before your mind did. As if some deeper part of you whispered, "Remember this, because someday it will mean everything." I didn't know your name yet. I didn't know your story. I didn't know your fears, your dreams, your scars, or the battles hidden behind your smile. You were still a stranger. And I was still living inside the version of myself that existed before you. It's strange to think about now. The person I was before meeting you. He feels familiar, yet distant, like an old photograph found inside a forgotten drawer. I recognize him, but I no longer fully understand him, because he had no idea what was about to happen. He had no idea that a single encounter could rearrange an entire emotional universe. And maybe that's the most beautiful mystery of love. Before it arrives, it feels impossible. After it arrives, it feels inevitable, as though it was always meant to happen, as though every road somehow led here. But in that moment, there was no certainty, only chance, only coincidence, only two lives crossing paths without understanding the significance of the collision. Tell me something. Have you ever met someone and felt absolutely nothing extraordinary at first? No lightning bolt, no cinematic soundtrack, no immediate certainty, just curiosity, just comfort, just an unexpected ease. Because movies have lied to us, they teach us that love begins with explosions, with instant certainty, with overwhelming passion, but real love often begins with something much quieter. Recognition. Not recognition of a face. Recognition of a feeling you've been searching for without realizing it. A feeling that says, I don't have to pretend here. And that feeling is rarer than people think. The world teaches us how to perform, how to impress, how to appear strong, how to hide our fears, how to protect our wounds. We become experts at showing polished versions of ourselves. Versions designed for acceptance. Versions designed for survival. But every once in a while, someone appears who makes those masks feel unnecessary. Not because they demand honesty, because their presence invites it. And that was the first thing I noticed about you. Not your appearance, not your voice, not even your smile. It was the strange sense of peace, the absence of pressure, the feeling that I didn't need to become someone else to be seen. I could simply exist, and somehow, that felt revolutionary. Maybe you know what I'm talking about. Maybe you've experienced that rare comfort too. The kind that arrives without explanation. The kind that makes conversations last longer than expected. The kind that turns minutes into hours without either person noticing. Because when connection is real, time behaves differently. It stretches. It softens. It disappears. You stop checking the clock. You stop calculating exits. You stop searching for the next thing. For a little while, being present becomes enough. And that is exactly what happened. One conversation became another. One moment became several. A stranger became familiar. Not all at once. Slowly. Naturally. Like sunlight entering a room. Not dramatic enough to notice immediately, but impossible to ignore once everything is illuminated. I remember finding excuses to continue talking. Questions that didn't need asking. Stories that didn't need telling. Moments that should have ended, but somehow continued. Not because either of us planned it. Because neither of us wanted it to end. And perhaps that is one of the earliest signs of genuine connection. When goodbye feels slightly disappointing. When leaving feels heavier than arriving. When a person you've only recently met somehow occupies more space in your thoughts than logic can justify. At first, you dismiss it. You tell yourself you're imagining things. You're overthinking. Reading too much into ordinary interactions. But then something strange happens. They stay. Their voice stays. Their laughter stays. Their presence lingers after they're gone. You wake up thinking about them. You notice things you want to tell them. You begin collecting moments throughout the day without realizing it. A funny story, a beautiful sunset, a random thought, a song, and somehow, every road leads back to them. Not because you're trying, because your heart has already begun moving in their direction. And here's the frightening part. You don't notice when it starts. Nobody announces, "Congratulations. You are beginning to fall in love." Instead, it happens beneath awareness, beneath logic, beneath reason, until one day you catch yourself smiling at a message, or rereading a conversation, or wondering whether they're okay. And suddenly the realization appears, quiet, undeniable, dangerous. This person matters, far more than they should, far more than you intended. And that's when fear enters the story, because every meaningful connection carries risk. The moment someone becomes important, vulnerability follows. The moment someone gains the power to make you happy, they also gain the power to hurt you. That truth terrifies most people. Maybe that's why so many run from love. Not because they don't want it, because they understand its cost. To love someone is to place part of your heart outside your own control. And that requires courage. Real courage. But we aren't there yet. Not in this moment. In this moment, Everything is still innocent, still unfolding, still becoming. This is the chapter before certainty, the chapter before promises, the chapter before either of us understood what we were becoming to each other. And somehow, I think that's why I treasure it so much. Because there is a unique beauty in beginnings, a beauty that exists nowhere else. The beauty of possibility, the beauty of not knowing, the beauty of standing at the edge of a story without seeing the ending. You know what I remember most? It wasn't a specific sentence. It wasn't a dramatic confession. It wasn't some unforgettable event. It was a feeling that appeared quietly and refused to leave. The feeling that life had become slightly brighter, slightly warmer, slightly more interesting, simply because you existed within it. And maybe that sounds small, but don't underestimate small things. Entire lives change because of small things. One decision, one meeting, one conversation, one person. Sometimes, the biggest transformations begin with the smallest moments. And looking back now, I realize something extraordinary. The day I met you wasn't extraordinary because something happened. It was extraordinary because someone happened. You. And while neither of us knew it then, while the future remained hidden behind countless unknown tomorrows, the truth was already there, quietly waiting, growing beneath the surface. Like roots beneath the earth before the first flower blooms. The story had already begun. Neither of us could see it yet. But life could. And perhaps life was smiling, because it knew something we didn't. It knew that years from now, I would look back at that ordinary day and realize it was never ordinary at all. It was the day everything changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but permanently. And if you're still listening to me now, hold on to this thought for a moment. What if the most important person in your story first appeared as an ordinary chapter? What if the greatest blessing of your life arrived so quietly that you almost overlooked it? Because sometimes destiny doesn't knock on the door. Sometimes it simply sits beside you and starts a conversation. And before you realize it, your entire future has a new face. There is something people rarely talk about when they talk about love. They talk about butterflies. They talk about chemistry. They talk about attraction. They talk about passion. But very few people talk about healing. Not the kind of healing that happens in movies. Not the dramatic kind where someone arrives and magically fixes everything that is broken. Real healing is quieter than that. Real healing often happens so slowly that you don't realize it's happening until one day you look back and notice the pain isn't as heavy as it used to be. And that's what you did. Not intentionally. Not because you set out to save me. Not because you knew where all the fractures were hidden. In fact, I don't think you ever fully understood how much damage was already there. Because, by the time you met me, I had become very good at hiding it. Maybe too good. The truth is that most people carry invisible scars. Scars nobody can see. Scars they don't even talk about anymore. Disappointments, rejections, abandonnement, broken promises. Moments that taught them painful lessons about trust. Pain has a strange way of teaching survival. After enough heartbreak, people learn how to protect themselves. After enough disappointment, they lower their expectations. After enough loss, they stop reaching so far. Not because they become cold, because they become careful. And somewhere along the way, I became careful too. Careful with emotions. Careful with hope. Careful with vulnerability. Careful with believing that someone could actually stay. Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever reached a point where trusting someone felt more dangerous than being alone? Where disappointment seemed so familiar that expecting happiness felt reckless? If you have, then you understand exactly what I'm talking about. Because some wounds don't bleed. Some wounds become beliefs. Beliefs that quietly shape your entire life. Beliefs like, don't expect too much. People always leave. The thing is that healing didn't begin with grand gestures. It never does. It began with small things. The smallest things. You listened. Really listened. Not the way people pretend to listen while waiting for their turn to speak. You listened as though my words mattered. As though my thoughts deserved space. As though my feelings weren't inconveniences. And maybe that sounds insignificant. But for someone who has spent years carrying things silently, being heard can feel revolutionary. You gave me something I didn't know I was missing. Presence. Not attention. Presence. There is a difference. Attention is easy. Presence is rare. Attention lasts minutes. Presence changes lives. And every time you were fully there, every time you listened, every time you remembered something small I had mentioned weeks earlier, something inside me softened. Walls I didn't know existed began to crack. Defenses I had spent years building started losing their purpose. Not because you demanded access, because you created safety. You know what's remarkable about safe people? They never force trust. Trust simply grows around them, like flowers growing toward sunlight, naturally, without effort, without pressure, without fear. And before I realized what was happening, I was telling you things I usually kept hidden, thoughts I rarely shared, fears I usually buried, dreams I had almost stopped believing in. Not because I planned to, because somehow you made honesty feel easier than pretending. And maybe that's one of the purest forms of love. Not being loved for the version of yourself you present to the world, being loved for the version you've been hiding. The one beneath the confidence, the one beneath the jokes, the one beneath the strength, the one quietly hoping someone will understand. Tell me something. When was the last time someone made you feel completely safe? Not safe from danger, safe from judgment, safe from rejection, safe from pretending, because those kinds of people are rare. And when they enter your life, they change more than your circumstances. They change your relationship with yourself. That is what happened to me. Before you, I spent years focusing on my flaws, years replaying mistakes, years carrying guilt for things I couldn't change, years believing I needed to become better before I deserved love. But you saw me differently, not because you ignored my imperfections, because you accepted them. And acceptance is powerful, more powerful than criticism, more powerful than advice, more powerful than correction. Because acceptance creates room for growth. You never made me feel like a project. You never treated me like something that needed fixing. You never looked at me and saw a collection of problems. You simply saw me, and somehow that changed the way I saw myself. Have you ever noticed that the right people don't give you confidence? They remind you of the confidence that was already there, buried beneath fear, buried beneath self-doubt, buried beneath years of disappointment. The right people don't create your worth. They help you remember it. And little by little, that's exactly what happened. I started speaking differently, thinking differently, dreaming differently, not because you instructed me to, because your belief in me made it harder to keep doubting myself. The voice that constantly criticized me became quieter, not silent, just quieter. And for the first time in a very long time, hope became louder than fear. That change didn't happen overnight. Healing never does. Healing is subtle. It's realizing you no longer replay the same painful memory every night. It's noticing old wounds no longer control your decisions. It's catching yourself smiling without forcing it. It's discovering that joy doesn't feel foreign anymore. And perhaps the most beautiful part was this. You never knew you were doing it. You never arrived each day thinking, today I'm going to heal someone. You simply cared. You simply stayed. You simply showed up consistently in a world where consistency has become rare. And consistency is healing. Being understood is healing. Being accepted is healing. Being chosen repeatedly is healing. Maybe that's why your presence felt different. Because so many people leave when things become difficult. So many people disappear when reality replaces novelty. So many people love the excitement of beginnings, but fear the responsibility of staying. But you stayed. Not perfectly. Not flawlessly. Not like some fairy tale character. Just honestly. And honesty has a healing power all its own. The truth is, you didn't erase my scars. You didn't rewrite my past. You didn't make every painful memory disappear. What you did was something far more meaningful. You showed me that my scars didn't make me unlovable. You showed me that my fears didn't make me weak. You showed me that my past didn't have to define my future. And once a person truly understands that, everything begins to change. Because healing is not becoming someone new. Healing is returning to who you were before pain convinced you to become someone else. Maybe that's why meeting you felt so extraordinary. Not because you transformed me into another person. Because you helped me find my way back to myself. The self I had lost beneath years of caution. The self I had hidden beneath layers of protection. The self that still believed in love despite everything. And if you ask me today what the greatest gift you ever gave me was, it wouldn't be a memory. It wouldn't be a moment. It wouldn't be a promise. It would be this. You made me feel safe enough to become myself again. And for someone who had spent years surviving, that felt a lot like coming home. Most people think life changes in dramatic moments. They imagine transformation arriving like a storm, a breakthrough, a victory, a life-altering event, something so powerful that it divides existence into two separate chapters, before and after. But the older I become, the more I realize that the deepest changes rarely happen that way. Real transformation is quieter, almost invisible. It doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in pieces, in tiny moments, in subtle shifts, in ordinary days that don't seem important until years later. And that's exactly what happened after you entered my life. Nothing exploded. Nothing extraordinary happened overnight. The world didn't suddenly become perfect. My problems didn't disappear. Responsibilities remained. Challenges remained. Stress remained. Life continued being life. Yet, somehow, everything felt different. Not because my circumstances changed, because I changed. And the strange part? I didn't notice it immediately. At first, it was little things. The kind of things most people would overlook. I smiled more often. Not the polite smile people wear in public. Not the smile used to hide exhaustion. A real smile. The kind that appears unexpectedly. The kind that starts somewhere deep inside. The kind you don't have to force. And I remember noticing it one day. I was walking alone, thinking about you. And suddenly, I caught myself smiling. For no reason. At nothing. At everything. And that was when I realized something unusual was happening. Because happiness had stopped feeling like a rare visitor. It had started feeling familiar. Have you ever experienced that? A period in your life when joy becomes easier? Not because everything is perfect, but because someone exists who makes the difficult days feel lighter. If you have, then you know exactly what I mean. Because love doesn't always remove burdens. Sometimes it simply gives you stronger shoulders. And somehow, every day became a little easier to carry. I slept better. Not because life became less complicated, but because my mind felt less alone. For years, every night had been crowded. Crowded with worries. Crowded with responsibilities. Crowded with questions that never seemed to have answers. My thoughts often felt like a room filled with noise. One concern speaking over another. One fear interrupting the next. Yet somehow your presence brought silence. Not complete silence. Just enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to rest. Enough to remember that not every problem needed solving before morning. It's amazing how healing works. Sometimes healing isn't fixing what's broken. Sometimes healing is finally allowing yourself to rest. And for the first time, in a very long time, I began resting. Not just physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. The constant state of alertness slowly disappeared. The endless preparation for disappointment became less necessary. The armor grew heavier than the heart beneath it. And little by little, I stopped wearing it. You know what else changed? The future. Not the future itself. The way I looked at it. Before you, the future felt like a list of obligations, deadlines, goals, responsibilities, tasks, things to survive, things to accomplish, things to manage. But after you, the future became something else, something warmer, something alive. Because suddenly, when I imagined tomorrow, I wasn't imagining it alone. And that changes everything. For years I had planned my life like a traveler carrying a single suitcase, only accounting for myself, only thinking about my own path, my own destination, my own survival. Then one day, without realizing it, every dream started, including another person. You. Not intentionally, not dramatically, naturally, like adding another chair to a table, like leaving space beside you without being asked, like instinctively making room for someone within your vision of the future. That shift sounds small, but it isn't. It's enormous. Because the moment you start imagining someone in your future, they become part of your hope. And hope is one of the most powerful forces in the human heart. Maybe that's why I began working harder. Not out of fear, not out of pressure, but out of purpose. Purpose feels different. Fear drains you. Purpose energizes you. Before, success had often felt like survival. After meeting you, success started feeling like contribution. Like building something meaningful. Like becoming someone worthy of the life I wanted to create. Not because you demanded it. Because loving you inspired it. And that distinction matters. The healthiest love doesn't force growth. It inspires growth. It doesn't say, I've changed so I can love you. It says, you are loved. And because of that, you feel brave enough to grow. That is the difference. And every day, I felt myself becoming slightly better. Not perfect, just better. A little more patient, a little more optimistic, a little more open, a little more courageous. One small improvement at a time. The world celebrates dramatic transformations, but real life rarely works that way. Real growth is built from tiny choices, repeated consistently. Tiny moments, tiny victories, tiny acts of courage. And somehow, You became connected to all of them. You became the reason I believed improvement was worth the effort. Not because I wanted to impress you, because I wanted to fully experience the life your presence helped create. And here's something beautiful I didn't expect. The things I once enjoyed alone became even more meaningful when shared. A song, a movie, a meal, a sunset, a random joke, a story from work. Things that once ended with me suddenly had somewhere to go. To you. It's difficult to explain how much that changes a person, because humans were never meant to carry every experience alone. We are storytellers by nature. We are meaning makers. And meaning grows when shared. Before you, many moments simply passed. After you, moments became memories. Because every beautiful thing immediately made me think, I can't wait to tell you about this. Does that sound familiar? Have you ever reached a point where someone's existence quietly becomes woven into every corner of your day? Not in an obsessive way, not in a dependent way, in a human way, a connected way, a deeply alive way, because that's what happened. You became part of my everyday world, part of my thoughts, part of my habits, part of my happiness. And perhaps the most surprising thing of all was this. I laughed more, much more, not because life suddenly became funny, because joy became easier to access. Some people bring excitement, some people bring passion, some people bring adventure, but the rarest people bring peace. And peace creates space for joy. That's what you brought. Peace. The kind that doesn't demand attention. The kind that quietly settles into your life and makes everything softer. The kind that allows your nervous system to finally exhale. The kind that reminds you not every day needs to be a battle. And when peace enters a life that has known struggle for too long, remarkable things begin to happen. Creativity returns. Hope returns. Dreams return. Energy returns. The heart begins opening rooms it had locked years ago. Rooms filled with possibility. Rooms filled with wonder. Rooms filled with belief. And maybe that's why loving you felt less like falling and more like awakening. Because for years I had been functioning, surviving, managing, enduring. But after you, I started living, truly living. Not every day, not perfectly, but genuinely. I became more present, more grateful, more aware of beauty, more aware of blessings, more aware of how precious ordinary moments actually are. And isn't that the strange miracle of love? It doesn't necessarily change the world around you. It changes the way you experience the world. The sky remains the same, yet somehow it looks different. The music remains the same, yet somehow it sounds different. The days remain the same, yet somehow they feel different. Because love doesn't always add something new to life. Sometimes it reveals what was already there. Beauty, meaning, connection, hope. Things that existed all along, but had become difficult to see. And maybe that's why, when people ask what changed after meeting you, I struggle to answer. Because the truth is, everything changed. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Not visibly. But completely. The changes were so small that no single one seemed important. Yet together they transformed an entire life. Like drops of water shaping stone. Like sunlight warming a frozen field. Like dawn, slowly replacing darkness. One quiet moment at a time. And if you're still listening to me, I want you to think about someone for a moment. Someone whose presence made your days feel lighter. Someone who made ordinary life feel more meaningful. Someone who changed you, not through grand gestures, but through consistent love. Because those people are rare. And when they appear, their influence extends far beyond what they realize. They don't just improve your life. They improve the way you experience life itself. That was your gift to me. Not perfection, not rescue, not fantasy. Something far more valuable. You made everyday life beautiful again. And sometimes, I think that's one of the greatest gifts one human being can ever give another. There is a moment that arrives in every deep love story. A moment nobody talks about when the relationship first begins. A moment hidden behind the excitement, behind the laughter, behind the butterflies, behind the beautiful discoveries. At first, love feels effortless. It feels light. You are simply enjoying someone's presence, enjoying their voice, their messages, their smile, their company. You don't think too much about consequences. You don't think too much about endings. You don't think too much about loss. Because in the beginning, love feels infinite. Like something that simply exists. Like something that belongs to you naturally. But then one day, something changes. Not in the relationship. Inside you. You wake up and realize something terrifying. This person matters. More than you expected. More than you planned. More than you ever intended. And suddenly love becomes vulnerable. Because the moment someone becomes important enough to change your life, they also become important enough to break your heart. That realization hit me quietly. The way most important realizations do. Not during an argument. Not during a dramatic event. Not during some life-changing crisis. It happened in an ordinary moment. One of those moments that seem insignificant from the outside, yet alter everything within. I remember looking at you, watching you laugh, watching you exist in that effortless way that only truly beautiful souls can. And an unexpected thought entered my mind. A thought so simple, yet so frightening. What would happen if I lost you? The question appeared without invitation. And once it arrived, it refused to leave. Because until then, I had been focused on what you added to my life. Now I was forced to confront what your absence would take away. And those are two very different things. Have you ever loved someone enough that the thought of losing them physically hurt? Not losing them because of betrayal. Not losing them because of anger. Just losing them. Life-changing. Distance. Time. Circumstances. Fate. The countless unpredictable things we cannot control. Because if you have,